Picture this scenario for a second. You're sitting at a cash game poker table.
Okay, I'm there.
Right. So you've been playing solidly for, I don't know, an hour or so. The pot in front of you is, let's say, 80 bucks.
Nice.
And you are holding a really strong hand, like top pair with a great kicker. The final community card hits the board, and suddenly, the guy across from you, who's just this recreational player drinking a beer, barely paying attention, he just shoves $400 all in.
Oh man, the classic massive chaotic overbet.
Exactly. It's completely out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And you fold.
Yeah.
You actually fold what was the winning hand. And why do you do it?
Wait, yeah.
Because you've studied the math. And according to, the most advanced poker theory available today, folding to that specific crazy bet size is mathematically the correct thing to do.
It is, it's an incredibly common and just uniquely painful experience for modern poker players. You do everything right, you follow the textbook perfectly, and you just watch your chips slide across the table to someone who doesn't even know what a continuation bet is.
Right. They don't know the terminology, they definitely don't study the game, but they're the ones cashing out. So welcome to today's deep dive. If you've ever walked away from a table feeling like you played perfectly but still got absolutely crushed, well, this one is entirely for you.
Absolutely.
We're unpacking this massive paradigm shift in poker strategy today. We're relying on some really fascinating insights and data from a training system called RangeFlowAI.
Yeah, and their data is just wild.
It really is. They've built this enormous data set of over 4 million real cash game hands to figure out exactly why doing the right thing is, well, slowly emptying your bankroll.
That data set is what makes this whole thing so fascinating to me. Because we aren't just talking about, anecdotal bad beats here.
Right, the classic "you won't believe what happened to me" stories.
Exactly. We're looking at 4 million actual instances of real people playing for real money. And the patterns that emerge from that much data are just undeniable.
So our mission today is to figure out why rigid, by-the-book play is basically a trap, and how transitioning to what they call maximum profit exploitative poker can completely turn things around for you.
Right.
But to get there, we really have to dissect that river shove scenario I just described. Why does the mathematically correct play actually lose us money in that spot? It all comes down to something called GTO.
Yeah, exactly. So GTO stands for Game Theory Optimal. Over the last decade or so, poker has essentially been solved by these massive
It's solved. Entirely figured out.
Pretty much. These computers play millions and millions of hands against each other until they reach an equilibrium. It's a strategy that's so perfectly balanced with bluffs and value bets that it becomes, mathematically speaking, unexploitable.
Wow.
So when you study GTO, you're essentially trying to mimic that computer. You're trying to learn this perfectly defensive strategy.
Which, sounds great on paper. You're building an impenetrable fortress. If nobody can exploit you, you should win. Right?
I think so.
But the problem is the context. The computer assumes it's playing against another supercomputer that is also playing perfectly. But when you sit down at your local 1-2 or 2-5 no-limit table, you are definitely not playing against a supercomputer.
No, you're playing against a guy who just got off work and wants to gamble. You are playing a solved game against unsolved opponents.
Yeah.
And the really painful irony here is that the theoretically correct play is actually the wrong play against these specific opponents and their, erratic tendencies.
Yeah, the source material uses an analogy that I think captures this frustration perfectly. It's like bringing a highly refined chess strategy to a game of checkers.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
Right. Like you've carefully controlled the center of the board, you're calculating 5 moves ahead, and then your opponent just arbitrarily jumps 3 of your pieces diagonally.
And then you get mad at them for breaking the rules of chess. It's just absurd.
It totally is. I kept thinking about it like a restaurant, actually. It's like bringing a Michelin star recipe to a late-night greasy spoon diner.
Oh.
You're back in the kitchen, cooking with this perfect French technique, agonizing over the precise temperature of your sauces.
And the customer at the counter just wanted a greasy burger with extra cheese.
Exactly. You're failing because you aren't cooking for the room you're in. You're serving up theoretical perfection to an audience that doesn't even speak the language.
That is the absolute perfect way to look at it. And while you're sitting there feeling, intellectually superior about your flawless technique, they are the ones walking away with all the chips.
Okay, so if this theoretical GTO approach is bleeding chips in the real world, how exactly is the money being lost? Because it can't just be bad luck over 4 million hands. What are the actual mechanics of this failure?
The mechanics are actually surprisingly predictable. The data reveals that the average thinking player, so the person actively trying to play good, solid, theoretical poker,
The ones reading the books and watching the video.
right, them, they make 47 specific exploitable mistakes every single session.
Wait, 47 leaks in a single session? That is a staggering amount of lost value.
It really is.
And it's not the dealer, it's not a cold deck of cards. It's the fact that the player pool as a whole has very specific psychological tendencies. And those tendencies just accidentally punish GTO play.
Let's break down exactly how that happens, because the source highlights some incredible statistics about how the average recreational player actually behaves.
Lay 'em on me.
For instance, 67% of players overfold to triple barrels on scary runouts.
Okay, let's translate that a bit for anyone who isn't, grinding at the casino every single weekend.
Mm-hmm.
A triple barrel means you bet on the flop, you bet again on the turn, and you bet a third time on the river.
Relentless pressure.
Right. And a scary runout is when the community cards suddenly align to make obvious flushes or straights possible.
Exactly.
So the data is saying that if the board gets really ugly and you just keep firing bets, nearly 70% of people will just surrender completely, regardless of what the math says they should do.
Precisely. Psychologically, they just don't want to deal with the stress of the decision. They'd rather preserve whatever is left in their stack than call a massive third bet when the board looks that terrifying.
Wow.
A GTO strategy might tell you to only bluff in that spot a certain percentage of the time so you stay perfectly balanced. But if you know 67% of the room is going to fold,
Then theory goes right out the window.
exactly, you should be bluffing relentlessly in that specific scenario.
That makes total sense. Here's another stat from the data that paints a really clear picture of how these players think. 73% of recreational players call too wide on the flop, but fold too much on the turn.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And by calling too wide, that means they're hanging on to hands they really should be throwing away.
It's the classic wait-and-see mentality. They pay a little bit of money on the flop because, well, they're curious. They have a weak pair or maybe a long shot draw, and they just want to see if a miracle card bails them out.
Right. But then the turn card comes. The miracle obviously doesn't happen, the price of the bet goes up, and suddenly reality sets in. They just abandon ship.
Exactly.
And again, if you're playing textbook poker, you might check the turn there to control the size of the pot. But the data says no fire that second bet because their curiosity just expired.
The psychology is so apparent when you look at it this way. Here is another major leak the data found. 81% of aggressive players shut down when facing a check raise on paired boards.
Okay, let's unpack that one too. An aggressive player loves to be the one driving the action. And a paired board is when two of the same cards hit the table, like 2 eights.
Right, which is a very hard board to connect with.
So if you check to the aggressive player, they predictably bet to try and steal the pot. But then you raise them. You check raise. Why does that completely paralyze them 81% of the time?
Because it completely short-circuits their internal narrative. Aggressive players rely heavily on momentum. When you check to them, they assume you're weak. But when you suddenly raise them on a board that is very hard to hit, it signals immense, unexpected strength. It essentially says, I trapped you.
I see.
Their brain just hits the brakes. They don't have a mathematical defense for it. They just have a psychological aversion to walking into a trap, so they fold.
And then there's the big one. 58% of the field misplays 3-bet pots out of position. Now, a 3-bet pot is when someone raises before the flop and then someone else re-raises them. It creates a bloated, expensive pot right from the start.
Right.
And out of position means you have to act first on every betting round, which is a massive disadvantage because you don't get to see what your opponent does first.
Those are pretty much the highest pressure environments in cash game poker. The pots are huge, and acting first feels incredibly vulnerable.
Exactly. But wait, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate for just a second.
Go for it.
When I hear these stats, that they fold too much here or they panic in 3-bet pots, part of me thinks, are these recreational players secretly geniuses? Like, are they intentionally setting these weird traps to exploit the fact that I'm playing textbook poker?
That is the crucial question. And the answer is basically the most fascinating dynamic in modern poker.
Which is?
No, they are absolutely not exploiting you on purpose. They aren't sitting there analyzing your range or thinking about your GTO frequencies at all. They are just playing instinctively, emotionally, and often very reactively.
So it's literally accidental exploitation.
Precisely. If you build this highly sophisticated defensive strategy designed to protect against a world-class opponent who perfectly balances their bluffs and value bets,
Right.
and then you run into a guy who literally never bluffs but refuses to fold a bad pair, your sophisticated defense is entirely useless. His bad habits accidentally neutralize your good habits. This is why the paradigm shift is so necessary. You can't operate in a theoretical vacuum. You have to shift to maximum profit poker, which is built entirely on the real-world tendencies of the pool you are actually swimming in.
Which brings us to the core philosophy this source material really advocates for. They call it becoming a donk hunter.
Yeah, I love that term.
Now, donk is an old, slightly derogatory poker term for a reckless player, but they redefine it here. A donk is someone who makes mathematically low-quality decisions, but, and this is the critical part, pays you off anyway. They play loud, they play confident, and they just hemorrhage chips.
The donk hunter philosophy represents a total mindset shift. It moves you from a passive defensive posture into an active, almost predatory one.
Right. You stop agonizing over whether your play was proper poker. The only goal is to spot exactly where the person across from you is lighting their money on fire and simply put a bucket underneath it. You adjust your strategy to explicitly exploit their specific weaknesses.
Let's look at how those adjustments actually work mechanically. Take the classic calling station, the player we mentioned earlier who just hates folding. The theoretical approach says you must balance your value bets with a certain number of bluffs.
But the donk hunter adjustment, you throw those bluffs right in the trash.
Exactly.
Bluffing a calling station is literally setting your money on fire. Instead, you do something called value betting thinner. You start betting with moderately good hands like maybe second pair hands you'd normally just check with.
Because you know they'll call?
Right, you bet them because you know this specific opponent will somehow find a way to call you a third pair. You extract value where the textbook says there isn't any.
What about the opposite extreme? The maniac. The ultra-aggressive player who constantly tries to bully the entire table.
The donk hunter adjustment there is just beautifully simple. You give them the rope. You don't try to out-aggress them. You just quietly check your strong hands and let them barrel their chips into the middle.
Yep.
You let their own compulsive need to bluff be the thing that bankrupts them.
And then you have the nit. The incredibly tight player who sits there for 3 hours just waiting for pocket aces.
Right.
The textbook says to play cautiously against them. The donk hunter says steal their lunch money. You relentlessly raise their blinds and push them off pots because you know for an absolute fact they will not fight back unless they have an invincible hand.
This whole shift removes so much mental friction. Think about the energy a player wastes at a table stressing out, wondering, oh man, was that the right play? Did I balance my range?
So much wasted energy.
The donk hunter doesn't care about balance. They just ask, what is the most profitable thing to do against this specific human being right now? You stop playing not to lose, and you start actively hunting for wins.
It is a really liberating way to play, but it brings up a very practical problem.
The reality check.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is very easy for us to sit in a quiet room, completely calm, and say, just value bet thinner, or just check raise the aggressive player.
Sure.
But when you are actually at the table, it's a totally different story.
Oh, absolutely. It's 2 a.m. You're down 2 buy-ins. Your adrenaline is spiking, you're exhausted, and some guy just spilled a drink near your chips.
Right.
In those moments of high stress, human brains don't easily execute new, complex strategies. We just default to our deepest, most ingrained habits. Our discipline vanishes. So how do you actually acquire the skill to do this when it really matters?
That is the whole science of skill acquisition. Knowing the data is only like 10% of the battle. The other 90% is pure execution. And this is where we have to look closely at the tool set RangeFlowAI provides, because it's not just a database of stats, it's a system literally engineered to build muscle memory.
Let's break down how that software actually worked to rewire a player's habits.
Yeah.
Because they aren't just selling a PDF of tips. For example, they have an AI-powered street-by-street coaching feature.
This is critical because of how feedback loops work in learning. Most players only review a hand by looking at the final result, like, did I win or lose a massive pot on the river?
Right, but the mistake usually happened 2 streets earlier.
Exactly. You made a tiny sizing error on the flop that just snowballed into a total disaster by the river. The AI isolates those micro mistakes before they compound. It caches the error at the root.
That's huge.
Then, to fix the foundational stuff, they use what they call 13 by 13 interactive range matrices paired with precision bet sizing training.
Okay, let's explain why that visual matrix matters. Before the flop even happens, you need an instinctive understanding of which hands to play from which positions.
Yes.
The matrix turns an abstract concept, your range of hands, into a visual spatial map. When you drill that repeatedly, you stop having to calculate it at the table. It just becomes a reflex.
And the bet sizing training integrates something called SPR, or stack-to-pot ratio.
Which is vital.
It really is. It's the mathematical relationship between the money you have left in your stack and the money already in the middle of the table. Understanding SPR is how you know exactly how much pressure to apply.
Right, because if you bet too much, you scare off the prey. But if you bet too little, you give them the right price to try and hit their miracle card.
Exactly. The software trains your brain to instantly recognize the correct sizing lever to pull based on that SPR.
And the way they deliver this training is highly adaptable to how adults actually learn today.
Yes, the 24/7 strategy chatbot.
This completely blew me away because of the accessibility. It has hands-free voice input. So imagine you just had a brutal, frustrating session.
We've all been there.
You're driving home, your brain is looping over a hand that confused you. Instead of waiting until the next day when the memory is faded, you can literally talk to the AI in your car.
That's amazing.
You describe the hand verbally, and it gives you instant data-backed analysis while the emotional context is still completely fresh.
It's essentially cognitive behavioral therapy for poker players. You're processing the trauma of a bad hand immediately, correcting the logical error before it solidifies into a bad habit.
They also have a multiplayer simulator, which taps into the power of active recall and gamification. You can invite a friend who actually gets 72 hours of access for free to sit across from you at a virtual table.
That's a fun feature.
Yeah, you play hands, but with the AI coaching overlay turned on, you can see who actually has the theoretical edge. And after a hand, you can click a button to reveal the exact estimated range of cards they were likely holding based on their position and actions. It literally lifts the veil on the game.
That click to reveal feature removes all the mystery. The human brain hates uncertainty. By showing you what the opponent likely had, it trains your pattern recognition. You start seeing the matrix of the game rather than just guessing.
All of this learning science translates into some very cold, hard math regarding return on investment. The source outlines the financial reality of this.
Let's hear the numbers.
The tool costs $27 a month or $270 for the entire year. Now let's look at the cost of those 47 leaks we talked about earlier.
Well, the data shows that each one of those common mistakes costs a player anywhere from $20 to over $100 in expected value every single time they make it.
It just bleeds you dry. But if you use the simulator to build that muscle memory, and you fix just 3 or 4 of those leaks, the math is wild. You save $100 to $300 in lost value per session.
That adds up fast.
It really does. If you play 3 times a week, you are retaining $1,200 to $3,600 a month in profit that used to just slip through your fingers. At a standard 1-2 no-limit game, fixing one single bad habit pays for the entire year of the software.
It really highlights why tools with interactive drill modes and progress dashboards are so vital. They provide objective, measurable proof that your raw data is successfully translating into automated execution under pressure.
So bringing this all together, what is the grand takeaway for you listening right now? We've charted this really fascinating journey today.
We really have.
We started with the trap of GTO, the frustrating illusion that playing perfectly balanced defensive poker against erratic humans would somehow guarantee a win.
And we examined the hard data, 4 million hands, proving that the player pool has deep, exploitable psychological patterns that inadvertently crush rigid theory.
From there, we unpack the Donk Hunter mindset, the necessary evolution from passive theory to active exploitation. And finally, we looked at how AI tools bridge the gap between knowing the right play and actually executing it when your adrenaline is pumping.
You know, even if you never play a hand of poker, there is a profound structural lesson here.
I completely agree. It is a masterclass in reading the room. It's about adapting to the messy reality of your environment. You cannot stubbornly cling to a textbook theory, whether that's in poker, in business negotiations, or just in life, if the theory doesn't fit the actual humans sitting across from you.
Absolutely.
You have to play the game that is actually happening, not the game you wish was happening.
Theory without context is just expensive trivia.
Perfectly said. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final incredibly provocative thought from the source material. It's a concept that really messes with your head. They call it a shrinking edge.
Oh, this is where we look at the entire ecosystem of the game.
Right. The source offers a warning. The immense value of this specific data set actually has a shelf life. It decreases over time.
Why is that?
Because as more of the player pool gets access to this data, and as more people learn to exploit these exact 47 leaks, the edges begin to shrink. If everyone at the table knows that 81% of aggressive players fold to a check raise, suddenly the aggressive players are going to realize they are being exploited.
Right, they will have to adapt.
It creates an endless evolutionary arms race. So I want you to imagine what happens to the poker economy when everyone becomes a donk hunter.
That's a crazy thought.
If all the thinking players are constantly adjusting to exploit each other's tendencies, does the metagame eventually circle all the way back around? Do players become so hyper-aware of these exploits that they are forced to return to pure, unexploitable GTO strategy just to survive?
The hunter inevitably becomes the prey the moment they stop evolving.
It's a brilliant paradox. The game can never truly be solved in the real world because the humans playing it are constantly reacting to the solutions. It's a living, breathing puzzle. So the next time you sit down at the table and you see a guy happily eating a sandwich and playing completely out of turn, well, take a breath. Remember that your perfect math won't save you. You've got to hunt the room you're in.